The contents of this video are for instructional purposes only. The techniques presented in this video can be dangerous and result in personal injury or property damage, even if they are implemented exactly as shown in the video. I take no responsibility for the result of anything you do with the information in this video. Mr. Steele. Okay, this video just got 20,000 more views. And that is one reason I'm making this video, but it is not the main reason. The main reason I'm making this video is that a whole bunch of people have been asking me for like a really long time how you can emulate the KISS idle up setup that Mr. Steele uses in Betaflight. And today's the day. I'm going to teach you what it is, how it works, why you might want to use it or might not want to use it, and how to do it in Betaflight. I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. The way that KISS handles arming is a little bit different from the way that Betaflight handles arming. In Betaflight, by default, when you arm the quad, the PID controller is immediately active. And that means that the quadcopter immediately starts trying to fly itself. And if you're, say, holding the quadcopter in your hand and you're just kind of wiggling it around, it'll fight you. And if you've got a prop on wrong or a motor spinning the wrong direction, because maybe you just replaced the motor and you didn't solder up the wires right, at that moment that you arm it, it will try to flip out. But KISS does it a little bit differently. In KISS, you can separate the arming of the quad, where the motors begin spinning, from the activation of the PID loop. And what that lets you do is arm the quad, the motors begin spinning, but the PID loop is not active, and you can wiggle the quadcopter around all you want. You can kind of hold it out, look at it, check the motor direction. You can do all this stuff without the danger of the motor spinning up and flipping out, hurting you, breaking your props, etc. Then you flick another switch, they call it the idle up switch, and then the PID loop is active and you can begin flying. So the first thing I need to do to implement the KISS Mr. Steele idle up in Betaflight is to tell Betaflight that we don't want the PID loop to be active when we first arm the quadcopter. Here in the command line, there's a parameter, PID at min throttle. And if we type set PID at min throttle equals off, and then type save, that will actually accomplish exactly what we want to accomplish. Now, if I arm the quad and leave the throttle all the way down, the PID loop is not active. And if I raise the throttle, now it becomes active and begins to fly. So I've kind of done it, but that's not how the KISS idle up actually works. With the KISS idle up, there is another switch that you flip in order to activate the PID loop. And this is pretty freaking important, because if you're potentially going to be arming the quadcopter like in your hands, you really want to know that the PID loop is not active so you don't get hurt. So the next thing we need to do is set up a switch on the controller so that when we flip the switch, the bottom of the throttle channel slightly raises itself, so that when we lower the throttle all the way down, it's not really all the way down and the PID loop remains active. And that'll be our idle up switch. Now I'm going to demonstrate this using my Radiomaster TX16S, but the procedures I'm going to use are identical for all OpenTX radios. They all run the same operating system and they all work the same. Just the screen on mine might be a little bigger than the screen on yours, and some of the menus may be slightly different, but everything I'm about to do, you can do on any OpenTX radio. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the model key and I'm going to page to the inputs screen. And I'm going to mess around with the throttle input. So let me just long press and edit my throttle input. And you can see it's very simple. It's got a weight of 100%, and it just means that when I raise and lower the throttle channel goes up and down. We can see the input and the output here as I move the stick. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change that, and I'm going to add a switch parameter. And what the switch parameter does is it says that this input line is only going to apply when a certain switch is in a certain position. So I'm going to highlight that switch parameter. I'm going to click the jog wheel one time so the switch parameter is flashing. And then I'm going to decide what switch I want to use to control my idle up. And in my case, I feel like making it switch SC. I don't know. You could make it any switch you want. I'm going to make it SC. And what I'm going to do is move switch SC. And when I move switch SC, it will fill in that switch position in this parameter. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to push switch SC all the way up. And switch SC up is going to be my default state during which the throttle works normally. Then I'm going to back out. And I am going to long press and copy that line. And then just roll the jog wheel down one time to make another copy of the line immediately below the first one. And long press and edit. Now, in order for this one to make the most sense, I also want to show you the Betaflight receiver tab and what the throttle channel is doing. And by default, the throttle channel goes from 1000 to 2000. Well, in my case, it's 1001 to 2003. If you don't have your endpoints set correctly, with your channels going from 1000 to 2000, you really want to do that. Well, you just want to do that in general, but you especially want to do that if you're going to try and follow along with this tutorial. So I've got a link in the video description to a video about how to fix your endpoints, and I definitely suggest you stop and check that out if your endpoints aren't set correctly before you proceed. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the switch parameter. You saw that we had this line active when the switch was in the up position. I want this line to be active when the switch is not in the up position. And here's how I can accomplish that. I'm going to go and highlight the switch parameter, click once to make it blink, so I'm editing it. And then I'm going to long press the jog wheel, and I'm going to choose invert. And now this will read exclamation point SC up. The exclamation point is programmer speak for not, and this line will become true when switch SC is not in the up position. So you can see as I move switch SC, and I apologize that I'm moving switch SC off camera, but I want to zoom in on the screen here so you can see it really clearly. But when switch SC is in the up position, this line is bold, which means it's active. And when switch SC is in the middle or down position, the second line is active. And that tells me that that logic is working. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to highlight this second line again and edit it. And now we need to make some changes. In order to see the effect of those changes, I am going to put switch SC in the down position so that this line becomes active. And I want to show you what the weight parameter does. And in order to do that, I'm going to turn the weight all the way down to like 50%. And you can see that with the weight at 50%, now the throttle channel, instead of going from full throw, minus 100 to plus 100, it's going at about half the throw, from minus 50 to plus 50, right? That's not exactly what we want, but it's getting close. The other parameter we're going to play with is the offset parameter. And as I change the offset parameter, you can see it scrolls the entire curve up and down. Let's set that offset back to 0, and I'm going to set the weight back to 100. What I really want to do is I want to tweak the weight just a little bit to make the throttle not be quite all the way down when it's all the way down. So I'm going to watch the throttle channel here in Betaflight, and you can see it's at 1001. And you can see I've got my stick low threshold set at 1005, just a little bit higher than that. Whenever the throttle goes above the stick low threshold, that is when the PID controller will activate. So we want to set this, let's say we set the weight to like 99. Now the throttle all the way down position is 1006. Now by lowering the weight, we have taken a little bit off the top and the bottom of the throttle. So you can see when I go all the way to the top, it's only 1998. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the offset slightly. I'm going to take the offset and put it at like plus 1%. And what that's going to do is it's going to slide the entire curve up slightly so that at the bottom, our throttle is at 1011. And at the top, it still goes all the way up to 2000. So with switch SC in the upward position, the throttle channel goes all the way from 1000 to 2000. With it in the down or middle position, the throttle channel cannot go down below 1011. And that means that the PID controller will always be active. Okay, so here we go. I arm the quad. PID loop is not active. Nothing's happening. Then I flip the idle up switch. PID loop is now active. I flip the idle up switch down. PID loop not active yet. Have we done it? No, we haven't done it because I arm the quad. I raise the throttle. Oh, You see, the way KISS idle up works is once you arm the quad, if you raise the throttle, nothing happens until you hit the idle up switch. So now we got to go a little deeper. Now you might think that the right way to handle this would be to take this first line and just make it zero out the throttle so that the throttle cannot be raised at all except after you flip the idle up switch. And that would kind of work. It would have the effect that we're going for, but it would create an unintended problem. You need to be able to raise the throttle when the quad is disarmed. Like if you're using the Betaflight OSD to go through the menus and stuff, you have to be able to raise the throttle or you can't do any of that stuff. So the logic that we really need is when the quad is disarmed, I can raise the throttle. But as soon as I arm the quad, now the throttle will not allow me to raise it until I flip the idle up switch. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust this first line. This first line is going to be our "we are disarmed, the throttle is allowed to do whatever it wants" line. And in order to do that, we're going to edit, and we're going to change the switch parameter from SC, our idle up switch, to SF, our arm switch. At least that's my arm switch. So let's say that for me, switch SF up is my arm position, and that means switch SF down is my disarm position. I'm going to make my switch parameter be my disarm logic, or my disarm position SF down, and that means that when I'm disarmed, the throttle will move completely normally. And at this point, we really are almost done, but there is one safety condition that we haven't accounted for. Watch this. I'm going to edit this line, and just a reminder that this graph here is showing you the channel position given the current state of the inputs. So if I have the idle up switch in the off position, idle up is off, and I go and arm the quad, watch what happens to the throttle. It may not be obvious, but we're at mid throttle right now. We're at 50% throttle. And the reason for that is that we have entered a condition that we haven't accounted for. Check this out. Notice that neither of these two lines is lit up. And so the throttle just goes to its default state, which is 50%. In other words, if you just flip the arm switch right now, you'll go straight to mid throttle, and then you'll have no throttle control at all. So that's not good. Here's how we fix that. The way that the inputs screen works is the radio starts with the very top line, and then it works its way down all of the input lines for this throttle input until it finds one line that is active, and then it stops, whichever the line is the highest up and is active. And at the moment, if we arm, none of them are active. So what we need to do is we need to copy this line one more time, and we need to add like a catch-all line. So when nothing else is true, this will be the sort of default state of the throttle. I'm going to edit this line, and this is going to be the catch-all. So we're going to take the switch parameter, and we are going to remove it. I'll show you what I did there was I long pressed to bring up the menu. I selected switches, which fills in switch SA, and then if you just roll the wheel to the left one click, it clears it out. That's the fastest way to clear it out. So now this is the catch-all line when none of the other there's no switch positions that it depends on. There's no fancy logic. It's just like this is what will fall to when nothing else is true. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the weight, and we're going to turn the weight down to 0. And we're going to take the offset, and we're going to turn the offset to -100. And that will basically mean that we're at 0 throttle. So this is what your inputs should look like. And just in case you haven't followed along and you want to recap, I'll run through them one more time so that you can double check that you've got them correct. The first line looks like this. Weight 100%. Switch SF down, or whatever your disarm switch is. The second line looks like this. Weight 99%, offset 1%, or whatever weight and offset you needed to get the throttle to be just slightly above your min throttle so that the quadcopter will idle up and activate the PID loop. And switch not SC up. In other words, whichever switch you've got for your idle up, it's the switch positions where idle up will be active. And the last one is weight 0%, offset minus 100%, and no switch. The last thing to point out is that here in Betaflight, you do need to have air mode off. If air mode is on, the motors can continue to spin up even after you flip back to idle up off, and turning air mode off, it fixes that. Well, okay, let's just demonstrate this and test it and see if it works correctly. We're going to begin by arming. PID loop is not active. Throttle has no effect. That's what we want. We idle up. PID loop is active. Throttle has an effect. And go back to idle up. Nothing happens. Perfect. Disarm. Perfect. Now, whenever you're screwing with arming logic, it is really, really important that you try to think of every possible scenario. Because if you only test the scenarios where everything works correctly, there could be a scenario where things don't work as expected that you didn't account for, and you could end up in an unsafe condition. For example, what if I'm flying, I idle up, I land, I disarm, but I leave the idle up switch in the idle up position? If I then arm the quad, is the throttle going to be raised, and is the quad going to take off and like fly away or flip out in my hand? It turns out no, but you have to at least think of that. And if you hadn't got there yet, this is the reason I put that big disclaimer at the beginning of the video, because there's a chance there's something like that that I've overlooked, that this stuff isn't safe, and I would hate for you to get caught with that. Disclaimer applies. Here's why it doesn't apply. When we activate idle up, what happens to the throttle? Well, we can look right here at the channel monitors, and you can see that when I activate idle up and then try to arm, oh, that's risky. Huh. I was going to say, when we activate idle up, the throttle raises itself slightly, and when the throttle is raised, the quadcopter will refuse to arm. The flight controller will refuse to arm. But that's pretty iffy, because you can see that at the moment that I flip the switch, nothing's happening until the exact moment when I arm. And then at the same time, these two channels move. The throttle goes up and the arming switch goes to the arm position. That is pretty risky, because if the arm position were to become active just a fraction of a second before the throttle went up, then the quad would arm and the throttle would raise, and it would try to flip out in your hands. And I can't promise you that that's never going to happen. It hasn't happened to me. So I guess the takeaway is, if you really want to do idle up, fly KISS. Hey guys, Joshua from the future here. I thought of a workaround for that, and since it's a potential safety issue, I wanted to include it in the video. The workaround is that you're going to go to your mixer screen, and you're going to find the mixer line that controls your arming switch, and you're going to edit that, and you're going to add either a delay up or a delay down of 0.1 seconds. Whether you do delay up or delay down depends on whether you push the switch towards or away from yourself when you arm. You only want to do one of those, because you want a small delay when you arm to give the throttle time to get to increase, but you do not want a delay when you disarm, because you never want a delay on disarming. Disarming is a critical safety thing. You want to disarm as fast as possible. So watch. For me, it's delay up, and what you're going to see is, watch the throttle and the aux channel here. So I'm going to take the idle up switch and I'm going to put it in the idle up position, and then I'm going to arm, and we want to make sure that the quadcopter does not arm itself and raise the throttle. What you're going to see is that the throttle channel is going to move first, and then the aux channel is going to move. It's a very small delay, but yeah. So this is so since the throttle moves first, the quadcopter will refuse to arm, because at the time that it goes to arm, the throttle is raised. And we can only arm if we have idle up off, and then everything is fine. Do you see this baby? Isn't he cute? Hit the subscribe button. join my Patreon, use my affiliate links, or just keep watching videos. That's better than nothing.
Cuckoo Gaga, subscribe to my daddy.